Hello all, and welcome to the 2018 Lifetime Achievement Award Fireside Chat. My name is Mark Lucerbrink. I am an advisor to the California Lawyers Association Environmental Law Section Executive Committee. It's a very important position, apparently. And I'm also a member of the Environmental Law Section's Lifetime Achievement Award Subcommittee. So we have a subcommittee that every year reviews the nominations and selects the winner. Before we start the fireside chat, I'd like to just say a few words about the Lifetime Achievement Award. 2018 is the 5th year of the Lifetime Achievement Award, and it is the 4th year of the fireside chat. The inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award was given posthumously in 2014 to Joseph Sachs. In 2015, the award was given to Clem Shute, and followed by Johanna Wald in 2016 and Byron Scher last year. Tonight's winner, Mary Nichols, and the subject of our fireside chat, is the chair of the California Air Resources Board. I am not going to go through Mary's storied career, as hopefully a lot of that will come up tonight during our discussion. But if you're very curious and you want the details, we have bio sheets over here with Bill Westerfield, and you're welcome to grab one of those. With regard to the award itself, when we select the winners, and I think this is something we all take a lot of pride in, we take into account a lot of factors, and those are all in the nomination form. But I think chief among them is we look, first of all, to see about what was the contribution to the field of environmental law. We, of course, look to see whether the nominee had implemented a novel or creative approach to an environmental law issue. But I think we also look very, very closely to see whether the nominee practiced law with ethics and integrity. And we also consider whether the nominee was able to sustain their achievements over the course of a full career. So it's the test of time. Not only have these qualities come through in our prior fireside chats, which we've recorded all of them, and you're welcome to, we're going to put them up on our website at some point soon. But in those fireside chats, I think all of these qualities have come through. But we've also had a window into some of the qualities that make these folks different. The courage, dedication, conviction, persistence, independence. You can make a very long list that really set them apart. I also think that in these fireside chat discussions, it's been great because we've been able to get some of the wisdom that these folks have accumulated and also hear a lot of the great stories that they've had throughout their careers. I want to make sure that we thank all those who have done the hard work to make tonight possible. There are a lot of people, but there are two in particular, I think, who warrant particular mention. One of them, Christina Robledo, who is our section coordinator, and she is instrumental. I don't know if Christina's in the room. Not now. She basically does the hard work to make sure that this event runs smoothly, and the rest of us try not to screw it up. The other person who is here with us tonight is our videographer, Scott Hester. And Scott, if you can raise a hand while you're not too busy. Scott's been with us every year, and he's done a fantastic job. Every year I call and say, is Scott going to be there? Because I get a little desperate at maybe we won't have him. But this year in particular, Scott had a death in his family earlier this week, and so he made an extra effort to make it up tonight. We're extremely grateful to have him. He's a huge part of this fireside chat. So a thank you to both of you, Christina, wherever you are, and Scott. Very much appreciate you and all the work that you do. Few points of logistics in terms of audience participation. We have placed cards on all of your seats, and there's pens scattered around kind of randomly. You're welcome to write questions onto those cards and pass them to the end of the rows where Ellen Peter's going to be on one side, I'll be on the other, and we'll collect those. And hopefully, if we have time at the end of the fireside chat, Mary can answer a few of those questions. Finally, we have two interviewers tonight. In the center is Kara Horowitz. She's a professor at UCLA Law School, and I have to read this. She is the Andrew Sabin Family Co-Executive Director of the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment Co-Director of the UCLA Law Clinic. and she's a fellow Bruin classmate of mine. So glad to have you. And of course, Tom McHenry, who is the president and dean of Vermont Law School and spent many, many years at Gibson Dunn in Los Angeles. So we've got great interviewers. So without further ado, let's get to the event. It's our honor to present the 2018 Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Mary Nichols, and the Fireside Chat.
Great. Well, it's a great honor to be up here next to Mary and Kara. And we'll start right in with some questions that Kara did most of the work on, but I'm going to claim some credit for. But it's terrific. I wanted to say two introductory things. One is that I hired Mary Nichols. I was on the committee that hired Mary to work at NRDC in Los Angeles, one of the things I'm deeply proud of. And the other was that I was hoping she'd come to Vermont Law School and teach for a semester, but thanks to the changes in term limits, I'm delighted to report that she's going to be staying at the ARB for a while. And so it is a premature Lifetime Achievement Award.
That's right. Thank you.
We're celebrating tonight. And there is yet another life. Mary's had a number of lifetimes of work. There's yet another lifetime ahead of her in her work. So we're thrilled to do that, and I'm going to turn it over to Kara.
Thanks, Tom. So thanks, Mary. Can people hear me? Okay. Okay. So we're going to start easy. These questions may get harder as the hour proceeds. But tell us, to begin, how did you get your start in environmental law?
Well, I fell into it as a newcomer to Los Angeles. I was looking for a job in the public interest world, but not necessarily in environmental law, partly because, as I think many people here can relate to, environmental law practically didn't exist when I first started practicing it. The Clean Air Act, which has become the touchstone of my work for many, many years, was passed in 1970. I graduated from law school in the spring of 1971, moved out to California looking for a job. I was married at the time, and I had supreme confidence that there would be a good, interesting, non-corporate job for me, just waiting for me. It took a little while to land that perfect job. I was turned down by the federal public defender. I was offered some things that just didn't seem right. And then I found out about these four guys who were leaving O'Melveny and Myers to start up an environmental public interest law firm called the Center for Law and the Public Interest. They had just gotten funding from the Ford Foundation. They were just getting ready to start work. And I presented myself to them and said, here I am, no doubt you'd like to hire me. And they weren't all that excited, although, coming from Yale Law School was a pro. Even Carlisle, who was a Harvard Law graduate, thought that Yale was maybe okay, acceptable. But I was willing to work as a law clerk because I hadn't taken the bar yet at this point. And I was interested in working on clean air. It seemed fairly obvious that that was a leading issue. And none of the four of them were all that interested in the Clean Air Act. It was brand new. Smog was technical and difficult. And they would rather work on water, coastal issues, fighting nuclear power plants, and CEQA, of course, but all the foundational cases were things that they were into. So I agreed I would work on clean air stuff. I was willing to work for slave wages while I studied for the bar, and only slightly more than slave wages after that. And I think finally I told them, with some degree of history behind it, that I was quite confident that I could raise money also. And that seemed really interesting. So they took a chance on me, and it worked out really well.
That's great. Well, Mary, the next question we could spend the whole time talking about, and it's sort of in two parts. What are the biggest issues you've worked on, and what are you most proud of? Well,
I think I would like to say that all the work I've done on the Clean Air Act is big, because it's a long series of things as opposed to one case. But basically, I have believed ever since I first read it, when it was a small rather slim, but I thought extremely well-written statute and very, very powerful, that used the way I believed it could be used and should be used. The Clean Air Act would not only help clean up the air in the places that needed it, but that it would also lead to improvements in other more fundamental activities that are the cause of our problems with air pollution, like the way we drive and the way we build out our cities, and that it touched on all those things, including climate change. And I believe that as time has gone on and more parts have been added to it and more details have been added to it, they've only strengthened it, not made it weaker. They've made it a little more complicated in various ways. And having been involved in one way or another, either as a litigator working on test cases or in government positions at the state and federal level, that I've been able to carry that forward. So that's the thing that I am the proudest of and that I think is the most important, is that I believe that I've kept good faith with the original work.
So you talked a little bit already about some of the changes you've seen in the Clean Air Act and more generally in environmental law, which you said barely existed as a thing when you started. But I'd love to invite you to reflect more on the ways that the environmental field, the environmental law field, has changed since you entered it. What are the biggest differences?
First of all, when I first went into court for the very first time as a brand new lawyer working on a case called Riverside versus Ruckelshaus, in which I represented the cities of Riverside and San Bernardino and a couple of nonprofit organizations in a case that was designed to, seeking an injunction to force the US EPA to produce a plan for how to achieve clean air in Los Angeles. That was a pretty large thing to be doing as a brand new lawyer. And I didn't feel particularly overwhelmed because nobody else had ever done that before, and it was a brand new law, and so why not? And I wrote a pretty simple complaint that said, this is what the law says is supposed to happen. Judge, you should make them do it. And the next thing that happened was that I got a call from the Department of Justice and the Chief Counsel of US EPA asking if they could come to talk to me. And I said, sure. So they flew out and they tried to explain to me why, if I did this, if I persisted, I would be really sorry because they would be forced to do things that would be unpopular since the federal government really only had the power to do what the federal government itself could do, which in their view was to ration gasoline. And the only way they could achieve the federal clean air standards in Southern California, they believed, was if they cut driving back to the point of nearly nothing. So that was what they were going to propose to do. And I said, well, I think that's unfortunate, but that's, that's what it is. And we went on from there, and many other things happened along the way. But the point is that I was emboldened, perhaps by inexperience, but also by the fact that there was a sense around at that time that the environment was really bad and it really needed help, and it was good to use the law to do something about it. So at about the same time I was having my meetings with the feds, I was also meeting with the law clerks who were my contemporaries for the federal judges. After we won that case at the district court level and the federal government decided not to appeal, we also, I was contacted by Judge Harry Pragerson, who, God rest his soul, is very willing to pick up the phone and say, that case, I really wish that was my case. Irving Hill, I don't know what he's going to do with it, but if I had that case, I would really do. And that was my opportunity to meet Judge Pragerson. He also gave me very good feedback on the complaint. And so it was just a small world. It was a small bar. There weren't that many people. So, I think what's changed in part is the numbers of people that show up here and other environmental law events. And yet, in some ways, I think the fact that there still is an environmental law section and that it has the kind of esprit de corps that it does speaks very, very well of the field and the hold that it's had on people. So
That was one of the many reasons we wanted to honor you, Mary. Hearing you say that before I ask the next question, I'm struck by how fools go where angels fear to tread. When even I moved to Los Angeles in 1987, everybody said, you can't clean up the air in Los Angeles. Well, the air in Los Angeles is much cleaner.
it is.
So
It is.
you were a true pioneer. On the subject of pioneering, you've done so much to develop regulatory programs in your first stint at ARB and in your second stint. Talk a little bit about what makes California special and maybe what lessons other states and the federal government might learn from California.
Sure. Well, I've had a lot of opportunities in the last couple of years in particular to think about that and to talk to other people, because there are other states now that are trying to pick up parts of our program, and we're much more interested in propagating it than I think we were in the beginning, when it was California or the feds and not much else in between when it came to clean air regulations. We now have 12 states and the District of Columbia that have adopted California's vehicle emission standards. They were allowed to do that, and they have become important allies of ours as there have been attempts periodically to roll back some of the vehicle standards and fuel standards. So there's a much bigger alliance now than there was of states and, of course, cities and others who have become real allies in this work. But I think that what makes California special is a couple of things. First of all, we do regulate in California, and there has always been, even in times when the Democrats were not in power and when anti-regulatory sentiment was higher, which it sort of waxes and wanes from time to time. As recently as 2010, we had an initiative on the ballot to overturn the climate law in California, and a lot of the rhetoric behind it was against regulation. There's a Twitter campaign going on right now, funded by Western States Petroleum Association and fronted by groups with names like the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which says state regulators are ignoring the will of the legislature and the cost of gasoline is going to go up $1.07 a gallon. You tell them not to, you can't afford to drive. People won't be able to get to work if they do. It doesn't exactly explain what it is that we're doing that's going to cause this to happen, and it's not true. But the point is that it's not all sweetness and light. It's not all that, we overcame opposition to regulation and now everybody's happy. But what there has been over time, I believe, is a pretty consistent, serious majority of people in California who believe in the need for clean air from a health perspective. We've kept that issue front and center as the most important aspect of what we're trying to do. And there has been a willingness on the part of politicians of both parties to face the fact that from time to time, almost every powerful interest group is going to feel offended or mistreated and be willing to stick with us and stick with the program. And in return for that, I would say all the governors that I've worked for and the other governors and air board people that I've seen along the way have, by and large, been really careful and thoughtful about trying to exercise this awesome power that we have in a way that makes it as light a burden and as cost effective as we could. I mean, we believed in that. We have always believed that that was our obligation, and that if you do that, and if you search for ways to, innovate a little bit with more market-oriented programs, which we've been doing increasingly in recent years, that you can, keep moving forward, keep making progress, and keep people feeling like what you're doing is worth it.
Yeah.
Sounds so easy, right?
Um,
Don't try this at home, kids.
So switching topics a little bit, and actually in some ways hearkening back to your last answer, which I can summarize, the one where you described the meeting with the feds and they said,
yeah.
so I'm going to describe that answer that you gave as the nevertheless she persisted
All
answer.
right, that's it. Thank you, Elizabeth.
And it brings me to my
Right.
next question,
Okay.
which is about the fact that when you graduated, entered the law field, that coincided with an opening of the legal field generally to women, or a further opening
Larger
anyway.
numbers. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you've experienced changing gender dynamics in your career up until, if you want to go there, even the last couple weeks.
Well, certainly when I started law school at Yale, I was one of 18 women. That was twice as many as there had ever been before. And we were there because of the Vietnam War. Men were deferring because they didn't want to be drafted, and they were doing other things. And so they filled up the class with women. That was the same year that women were admitted for the first time to the undergraduate college at Yale. So there were lots of women around, but in the law school, every one of us was known by name, and everybody knew who we were and where we were most of the time. So that was certainly a different time. And we had a consciousness-raising group, which was chaired or led by our one and only female faculty member at the law school, who subsequently became a federal judge. And she was an expert on the UCC. And she was made to walk up the back stairs at Morey's when they had faculty meetings, because women weren't allowed in the front door in those days. And when I moved to Los Angeles, the California Club also had a separate dining room for women who were accompanying the male members. So, all of those things seem incredibly old-fashioned. We used to talk about whether it was okay to wear a pantsuit to court if you were going to court, or whether the judge would be so prejudiced against you because of that would cause harm to your client. And was that, were you making a statement, or were you representing your client? How do you handle that situation? I don't think people have quite those kinds of discussions anymore. And at my old law school, women are more than half the class. And unfortunately, this makes me sad to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. The first woman lawyer that I ever met, who was a friend of mine, Cynthia Lichtenstein, and became sort of a mentor to me when I was just out of college, said, the thing about law is right now it's a sort of highly paid, highly regarded profession, and so it's very hard for women to get in. But as soon as women start to make up a very substantial number, you'll see that the prestige will go down and the salary levels will go down.
Oh, what a
Because
comment.
that was how she saw it. In Europe, law is a real profession. There always were way more women lawyers in France. Yeah. Maybe not so much England, but definitely on the continent there were, because it wasn't that big a deal. It was like it was a profession, but it was maybe like nursing or something, social work maybe. Anyway, so what has changed? Things have changed obviously because of the numbers and the variety of different things that women are doing in their careers, and you find women on all sides of all issues, which is very healthy, I think, and good. But at the same time, there are still things about the dynamics between women and men that haven't changed completely, and I still do think that law is one of the best from that perspective. I always have believed that once you convinced lawyers that there was an issue of fairness and they could analyze it, then they would also, implement those things. So some of the things that are matters of policy, like parental leave or things like that, change when you get to have more women. But the issues of power dynamics and, whether there are going to be people around who will try to get away with whatever they can get away with, haven't changed quite so much. And so there's still a lot to be done.
We're going to switch gears a little bit too, Mary, and ask you a question about law school curriculum in a moment.
Oh,
but
gee.
before we do, make sure everybody in the room knows there's some index cards, and if you have some questions for Mary, to go ahead and write the questions down, and Ellen over here and Mark over here will collect them and sort them out, and then we'll pass them along. And by the way, I just want to tell you, this is so much fun to hear your thoughts on these things.
Thank you.
We have a lot of students here. I think there are 30 students from UCLA Law School, maybe more.
25?
25. We have 2 from Vermont Law School, came a long way. But what would you be telling students and young lawyers that they should both be taking in law school and what they should be concentrating in terms of the skill set that they should be learning to become effective environmental lawyers like you?
I feel like environmental law is spreading at the same time that more people are looking at environmental aspects of cases that they're working on, and that's a good thing. And I guess I am a little bit of a throwback in the sense that I believe that learning how to learn a new field and how to write about it is still the most important thing that you can have as a lawyer. That if you didn't come into law school as a good writer, you should really work at improving your writing while you're in law school and take advantage of any opportunities that are out there. And I think that the willingness to step in and tackle new issues without fear is also pretty important. And not to be arrogant, but just to say that if we can't find ways to understand the underlying facts of any controversy or case or issue that we're involved in, then how do we expect anybody else to be able to do it? So I think just going to the best law school that you can go to and learning things like civil procedure. I'm really big on civil procedure.
All the civil procedure professors around the country are going to be happy to hear
I
that.
hope so.
One thing people talk about a lot today in environmental law is the need for interdisciplinary training, and they talk about communication and science and business management, that sort of thing. Thoughts about that as your younger lawyers are charting their careers?
Well, first of all, I'm the last person to advise about how everybody else should have their careers go, because I was very fortunate to be tapped for a pretty significant governmental position at an early age. I was able to work part-time at that job because it was part-time in the beginning, and have my children without having to have enormous difficulties with figuring out how to balance my family. I mean, it's always everybody struggles with how to have a family life and how to have a career, but it wasn't to the extent that many of the women that I've known over the years who had to make choices about when or if to have kids because they wanted to have an opportunity to have a partnership or to work on really significant cases. That I didn't have to have those particular struggles, and I feel like the thing about the idea about broadening your areas of expertise should be true for everybody. I mean, you should be able to adapt to whatever the new opportunities are that are coming along, and the more background you have, whether it's in science or architecture or anthropology or whatever, the more opportunities you're going to have to carve out a role for yourself, not necessarily just in a law firm or just in public service, but working in a whole variety of other kinds of private sector occupations. The fastest growing sector of our economy is the not-for-profit sector, and there are people out there looking for advocates, looking for thinkers, looking for leaders, people who can find consensus in very difficult times, and all of those are skills that I think people should try to cultivate and figure out, which of them kind of makes sense for them. But having a law degree, as far as I'm concerned, is an asset. Whatever else it is you're doing, it's good to have a law degree. It's good to go to law school.
The law school dean is shaking his head.
Yes, I agree.
And the law school professor
Well,
agrees.
and
so there we
I'm
go, yeah.
speaking, well, I just lost 2 of them, but here's one future lawyer right over here in the corner, my granddaughter Charlotte. So, we expect that there will be more.
Right. So, fair warning to the audience and to you, Mary, this is a Trump question. So, at the risk of understatement, it's been a tumultuous couple of years for the principles of conservation and regulation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we got where we are and where we're headed next.
Well, if I knew
I told
the
you they were
answer
gonna
to
get
those
harder.
questions, yeah, I'd probably be doing something else. I don't know. I feel like the rhetoric of Trump is so different from what he actually does that it's simply a new kind of beast that we're dealing with here right now. When even General Motors and Ford say, we didn't really want to be deregulated. We just wanted the regulations made a little easier. And, the president and his EPA administrator are saying, nope, sorry, we're going to go full bore. Too bad, we're going to deregulate you more than you ever wanted or more than you even think is good for you. This is not a world that we're used to living in or that we necessarily know how to deal with effectively. How we got to the point where Trump is our president, there's a lot of people who've looked at that, but I think the number one factor has to be the celebrity factor, the voting for somebody that people saw in their homes, for many years and believed would change things. And that it was an election where there were things that people wanted to see change. They didn't want a continuation of what was going on. There's a sort of conventional wisdom that all elections are really about change or staying the course. Which one of them you're more frightened of? Apparently people were more frightened of staying the course at that point. They got more change than they wanted. Now we'll have to see what happens. But I can't, do a more profound analysis than that. I really try hard not to demonize the opposition, not only because it isn't effective, but also because I think it makes you less able to think or react and do smart things, So I have to think that those of us who are focused on building the case for doing something better, at least in the areas that I'm most involved in the environment and in climate change, have to just stick to it and go on the offense wherever we see the opportunity. And unfortunately, nature and our own bad habits over centuries have provided us with many new opportunities to convince people that something more needs to be done. And I don't, it's doubtful that more can be done while the current people are still occupying the White House. So hopefully we'll get them out of the way and then we can move on.
Well, in 16 days, we'll have some answers, won't we?
Yeah, partially.
Or some, yeah, I think
some
you're right.
Anyway.
Mary, we just have a couple more, and then we're going to go through the questions. But one of the questions that always comes up among younger lawyers is, how do you start your career? Is it best to start in government service, best to start with a nonprofit, start with a private law firm, start in-house with a corporation, as some people do? Some thoughts about that? You've had experience in so many different areas, and I realize many of our other honorees have as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've moved around in a number of different ways over my career, but always pretty much with the same set of concerns, the same interests, the same attributes, I guess, that you sort of bring from place to place. And so, my goal in life has always been to be effective wherever I was. And if I was in a place where it didn't look like that was going to work, then it's time to go someplace else. And I still think that's true. I mean, I guess my main piece of advice, and I say this with some hesitation because, again, I didn't have to face this choice. When I went to law school, I'd already been working for a couple of years, so I had some savings. And my parents were still willing to help me at that stage. So when I came out of law school, I had no debt. I could do what I wanted to do. If that's not the case for someone, they're in a very different position, and it becomes much harder. You have to make some tougher choices and possibly swallow hard and do things you don't want to do, although there are more ways out there now, I believe, to get forgiveness of loans and postpone them and all of that. But that, to me, is the number one issue about where you should go to law school, how you should approach it, is don't come out with ending up with your hands tied behind your back.
So we'll wrap up with this question, and again, pass us, yeah, exactly, thank you. Pass us cards if you have them. What makes for a good environmental lawyer? You've seen bunches of them at this point, good ones and bad ones.
Yeah, I think the same things that make for a good lawyer, period, is the ability to intuit what your client really needs and, not be stuck just sort of blindly following requests that you might be able to convince them there are better ways to accomplish, being open to understanding what the other side or sides are trying to accomplish and looking for ways to solve problems. I know, it's different depending on whether you're trying to build a development or win a case or, make law in some new area. There's slightly different attributes that you need in all those things, but still seems to me that just, be smart, don't be arrogant, work hard, all those things.
Okay. To the law school students out there, be smart, don't be arrogant, work hard. All right, do you have some good ones?
Yeah, you've got a couple. I'm going to ask Kara to ask the CARB questions in a second, Ray,
Okay.
but you got two other questions that are sort of more general, and then we'll go to the CARB specific ones. One is a question indicating that only 2% of Americans list environmental issues as most important. The way I've heard it often is that environment is the fourth on everybody's top three, but there's lots of different ways to say it. Why do you think that's true? And then sort of related to the same thing was a question saying, assuming we continue to have a gridlock in Congress, how does the coalition of states continue to address climate change? I think both those questions are linked
Yeah,
because
they're
they go to
related.
political will.
Yeah, so first of all, I have been involved over the years in a number of efforts to try to elevate the importance of the environment in the electoral process, including something that I was a co-founder of that was going to get George Bush out of office because he was not good on the environment. And, I've been on the board of the League of Conservation Voters off and on, state, but certainly a supporter of the local and federal organizations as well. And it's absolutely correct that identifying environmental issues as your top issue is a very rare thing. It is never, whatever it's the top, it's 5th or 10th or whatever, but it's not number one. And I think that's largely because, A, people take it for granted that, the environment is out there and who would be stupid enough to want to wreck it. And two, that when you present the issues in a kind of a generic way like that, it's just too abstract for most people to deal with. If you say, do you want to have, a toxic waste dump next to your house? That's a very different question, and everybody who's affected by that potential toxic waste dump is likely to have a strong opinion, and very few of them are going to be for it. So I do think that the environmental movement as a movement has oftentimes not been able to present the issues in ways that seem very salient to people. Again, I have to say that as finally the message begins to sink in through multiple assaults on our coastlines and multiple freak weather events and so forth, that something is going on there, the level of people who say, oh no, there's nothing happening, goes down drastically. And then you still are faced with the question, okay, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to tell people what there is that you want them to do or that you can do? And a lot of our politicians have been quite slow, if not unwilling, to offer up solutions. But when they are willing to offer up solutions, like some of the major legislation that's passed this year in California, I mean, we have a history of doing sort of landmark, bold, stake in the ground kind of legislation. But, when the politicians decide that this is something that they can do and that they're willing to do, the level of affirmation and support that they get for it is very high. And again, I think that's part of what has now encouraged more California politicians to keep on persisting and doing more of this. So success breeds success in this as every other field. And I think that's how we do it. That's how we get there, is by showing people, demonstrating that there are things we can do, but not necessarily asking them to sign up and say, yes, this is one of my most important issues. I don't think we need to demand that of people.
So these two questions are somewhat related. One is, what's the biggest challenge facing CARB right now? And then the second question presents the particular example of California forest fires that are raging throughout the state, seemingly season after season, emitting particulate, soot, black carbon, et cetera, that is unregulated, and asks how CARB in particular is dealing with that issue.
So the biggest challenge facing us right now is that we have an executive order, which I suspect will not be rescinded by the next governor, that requires us to develop a plan to get to a net neutrality, meaning no net carbon going into the atmosphere by 2045. That's a huge task, and we don't know exactly how that's going to happen, but one of the things we can be pretty sure of is that it will require some use of technologies that can actually take carbon out of the air and do something with it that renders it useful or stores it, one or the other. So we're going to have to do that, and at the same time, because we're, as a planet, as a world, not moving fast enough to get to even the goals that we have established, we're going to have to find ways to move faster, and particularly to capture more of the very short-lived climate pollutants like methane. We can't afford to sort of act as though CO2 is the only pollutant that we care about. We've got to go after the HFCs and the methane and the NOx and so forth. So that's going to be a big, big effort. And many of the things that need to be done are not directly under CARB's regulatory authority. So we have this wonderful, plan that we get to produce, but we don't actually implement large chunks of it. And so that means that we have to convince others within the administration and increasingly in the private sector and at the local level that these are things that they want to do and find ways to help them accomplish those goals. We've already expanded the variety of different issues that CARB deals with, I think, well beyond what many people might have thought was where we should have been years ago. But I'm not sorry about that, because I think it was necessary to have enough expertise in a number of issues to be able to put a sensible plan together for climate action. But now we need to have others taking on large pieces of this work.
I'm struck by how much you've accomplished, Mary, in your time, but also how much we have to do. So,
Yeah.
Kara, you're going to
That's why I can't
leave you
retire.
the last question. Yeah. You cannot.
So it's unbelievable to me, but we are just a couple minutes away from the end of this fireside chat, which has flown by. So I'm going to invite you to give us some closing thoughts.
Oh gosh, I hate doing that. Okay, well, closing thoughts. First of all, I just want to say how grateful I am to you two, friends and colleagues of many years, for inviting me to do this and for making it as painless as it has been. And second, I guess what I'd like to say to the group here is that I am really excited about the numbers of people and the energy and commitment and will. This is not, I'm really not being modest in any way when I say that none of what we've been able to do at the Air Resources Board could have been done without the help and support and input and action of thousands and thousands of other people. And the environmental bar, including the people that we regulate, as well as the people who come to us and demand that we do more or do things differently, have all played a big role in shaping that success. So I really do view this as a group accomplishment, and I'm happy to have had you all with me all this time.
Well, thank you so much. What a wonderful way to end, Mary.
Time for a drink. That was so fun.
Thank you for doing that.
And it was standing room only.
Thank you.
I kept thinking
Do I
of
get
new
my
questions
do
I wanted to ask.
Do I
It
get
was
my
terrible.
bourbon now?
Oh, you get your bourbon now, absolutely.
Wait, is